We're live.
Welcome back, everybody, to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It is Wednesday, March 25th, and we are here with Michael DeRocher, Director of the Division of Fire Safety, to talk about S202, an act relating to portable solar energy generation devices. I'm Rep. Kathleen James from Manchester.
Chris Morrow, Windsor, Bennington. Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Territory, Washington, too.
Graham Flintner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
In the room.
Audrey Lida, interning with Representative Worth.
Great.
Hedi Irby, interning with Senator Watson.
Super. All right. And we have someone joining us online.
Yes, Dennis Blair, Chief Electrical Inspector, Division of Fire Safety.
Super. And for the record also.
Michael DeRocher, Executive Director for the Division of Fire Safety.
Super. All right. Over to you.
All right. Well, first of all, what was nice about this bill out of the gate was the fact that Senator Watson had reached out to the Division of Fire Safety with some draft language initially. So we did have the opportunity to weigh in on some of the language from the very beginning, which to me, that was, for us, that was nice that we had that opportunity to engage in conversations. Our position with this bill is we're not opposing it. We're probably neutral. A little bit of this is whether the cart is a little bit in front of the horse here. And the reason I say that is the language in here referencing UL 3700, that is a standard in which manufacturers of this equipment will have to meet those specific safety guidelines and standards. I'm not sure how many manufacturers we have now that actually have that UL listing or certification. Because this is fairly like an emerging issue across the country. I think there's possibly 25 or 26 states now that are seeing some type of legislation being introduced. Some states have gone to studying it further because nobody really knows how to put their hand on this thing. So the UL 3700 standard is a pretty good start, right? It addresses a lot of the safety issues. I think this, as it's written right here, as far as a fire safety perspective, is pretty solid. The concern we have, of course, is all the unlisted and all the untested equipment that you could purchase online now, whether it's Amazon or any of these online platforms, where you're taking appliances that have a power output and injecting it into a system that has power, receiving power. You can't do, the National Electrical Code doesn't allow that to take place. So you're not supposed to be taking like something that generates electricity through a plug and plug it into your existing electrical system. You're backfeeding an electrical system that is designed to provide output on that circuit. And Dennis can certainly speak on it.
Yeah, Rep. Mark.
So when you have generators, just a home generator that's equipped so you're plugging it in on the other side of the panel.
I'm going to have Dennis speak. Dennis can speak to all the technical aspects of this, so
Okay.
I don't get myself in trouble. But so there is a consumer element. The other thing I would say here is that under the UL standard, you have to have a dedicated electrical circuit for these. So that means that the plug is going to have to be plugged into a specific outlet receptacle. If you're outside a single family owner occupied home, then we regulate that particular circuit that's going to be added. That means that somebody, if it's a 1 and 2 family dwelling, the owner can file the work notice with us they can actually do the wiring themselves, but it does get inspected by our state electrical inspector. So, there is gonna be an electrical work notice required down the road once the manufacturers get this all situated. And that's gonna drive the cost of these units up, right? Somebody's gonna have to hire a licensed master electrician to come in and put that dedicated circuit in. So now these units may be $2,500. I'm just using that as a rough figure. So, then you add the cost of the master electrician. You know, you're looking at a 25 year payback period on the projected savings of $150 or $200 annually, which is because I've listened to other previous testimony, that's what's been raised. So, so that's basically a quick rundown. We're going to be neutral on this.
So one question, you said that, the owner of a building can do the wiring in a 1 and 2 family, or 2 unit building, but it has to be inspected. But then above that, it's for 3 units and up, has to be done by a licensed electrician. Correct. Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that.
And the other issue we have on the consumer side is we don't regulate appliances. So if there's no wiring done, we don't regulate an appliance. Like if somebody wants to plug a fan in or an air conditioner, we're not regulating that under our electrical safety rules. So there is so as we sit right now, obviously from a safety perspective, our concern is all these other systems that are out there that haven't been tested, and you know, we're relying on the consumers to install these systems correctly. So, but as far as this bill goes, some of the other states have gone to studies, like special legislative studies, until they can grapple with all this stuff. So, but the language here from a safety perspective seems pretty solid to me. You know,
So one of the other states we're looking at is Virginia. They allowed 1 unit that was under a certain wattage, which I think was stipulated in the bill. They allow 1 to be plugged in to a regular outlet without a dedicated circuit, I believe. Do you have an opinion on that?
I don't, but Dennis can answer that. I just know there's electrical hazard concerns with plugging these into an existing electrical system. Even if you have like knob and tube wiring in some of our existing homes here and so forth, I think Dennis can speak to that.
Go ahead, Mike, I have a question.
Any concerns from firefighters side of the table?
I've had a number of conversations with the fire service. They were on the fence with this, but it's some of it, I think, is not being familiar with it, right? Not being aware of this. So I have mentioned to them the UL 3700 standard, the language. We have offered to the fire service to meet with Dennis, and Dennis can explain the whole entire concept of this. I mean, it wouldn't hurt the committee if the committee wants to hear from the fire service. I can easily make that connection. So you can bring someone in from the fire service.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Okay. Well, I had a question on, you mentioned that the electrical code, National Electrical Code does not allow plugging generation into a circuit, not at the panel, but at the branch circuit. So.
No, I didn't say a generator. I'm gonna let Dennis.
Okay,
speak
all
to
right.
the technical
It
aspects of that.
might be, I figured it might be a Dennis question. I just wanted to ask you on the code issue about.
Yeah.
I wanted to clarify what you said.
Sure.
But let's ask Dennis.
Yeah.
Hi, Dennis.
What's your question?
Well, I thought your boss said that, the NEC does not allow, plugging, an appliance that generates electricity into a circuit.
Yeah.
Did I hear that correctly?
The NEC regulates how a circuit's used and how it needs to be installed. And currently, um, given a branch circuit with a receptacle, that's utilized or is installed to only export power to an appliance. It's not designed and listed specifically to import power to an electrical infrastructure system within a house.
So is it
So
disallowed by
um, by default, yes. If a receptacle is designed to only export power, you can't import power to it. So the UL 3700 covers that base by saying a dedicated branch circuit needs to be installed for this device with a specific plug type and receptacle.
Right, okay,
So as long as somebody is adhering to the UL 3700 standard, we've got that base covered for now. I anticipate the NEC will start writing some code specific to plug-in photovoltaic at some point. UL jumped on this as a priority because they saw it as a pretty big movement in the States. And that's how we arrived at this 3700 white paper so quickly. Usually it takes a couple of years to generate something like that. This was done in a relatively short amount of time when I think Utah and California started the conversation last year.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so that seems like that would disallow, what, Brett Morrow mentioned, seems to be in the Virginia law or the Virginia bill that would allow, a PV or plug-in PV, in a branch circuit, not a dedicated circuit, as long as the wattage was less than, I think it's 391 watts or something like that. But that seems like that would be disallowed by national code.
Um, by the UL 3700 standard, it would be
Well,
disallowed.
and by
So,
UL. That's
so
right.
anybody building that system and testing it to that 3700 would would most likely indicate with the installation instruction manuals provided with that system that a branch circuit and a specific plug type needs to be installed with it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
And one note on the you had a question regarding the 1 and 2 family. Um, just for clarification, we do not inspect the single family owner occupied home.
Right,
The only single family would be a rental type unit.
right. I'm aware. Thank you.
Rep. Southworth?
Could you explain potential issues, dangers associated with someone not plugging it into a circuit by the UL 3700 requirements?
Yeah, overcurrent seems to be the biggest concern, and the touch shock hazard with a cord end, a male cord end that would plug into a receptacle from the generation device. Um, so you guys have probably heard the overcurrent discussion. Um, a branch circuit's only good for 15 or 20 amps. The proposed system maximum allowance is going to be 1200 watts. That's about 10 amps. So if you had other appliances plugged into that same branch circuit that would accumulate enough ampacity to go over that, then theoretically we have an overcurrent condition.
And if it was hardwired, like for a portable standby generator on the other side of the panel, that would mitigate that problem, correct?
Uh, Portable
Standby
generator.
generator, yeah.
Yeah, that's something that would feed into a panel directly. That receptacle is designed to import power to a home's distribution system. It's designed and listed for that. That would only, it either comes from um, a panel that does transfer switching or to a backfed breaker that is interlocked with a main that would have to be disconnected. I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to be clear, people who have backup generators in case of power outage have those hardwired into their service panels. That's how they're installed, right?
correct.
Yeah.
Just a little fun fact, there is a thing called a suicide cord, which has two male ends on it. People have been known to plug into a generator and then backfeed a receptacle in the home, which in theory does backfeed the whole panel. Those are frowned upon because there's no way to disconnect, or there's no regulation or anything that forces you to disconnect the main from the utility grid, which is one of the things we're concerned with generation. Backfeeding the grid could potentially put high voltage back onto the utility lines where you may have a line worker working in the event of a storm or an outage.
Yeah.
Hence the interlocking devices, transfer switches. Most of the things that I've read up on the plug-in photovoltaic is the inverters that are used are anti-islanding, which means they cannot export any power unless they see a utility sine wave or utility power. So they would disconnect in the event of an outage. And there's an IEEE standard, I think, applied to that one, which is recognized also by that UL 3700 standard.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have additional questions, for the folks from DPS? Yeah, from
No, I
Southbrook.
just, did you hear that request fire service to come and testify?
I did not hear that.
Okay, could we have somebody from fire service come in and then Mr. Dorosher said that he could set that for us.
Great. Just send, if you could just email me and or our committee assistant with the name of who should come testify.
Sure.
Great.
So we have a coalition of all the fire service membership, so we all get together on a monthly basis, so we'll take care of that.
And good.
Okay, well, so I guess just to sum up, as long as these things adhere to UL 3700, Division of Fire Safety is okay with it.
Right, yeah, we're to what Dennis stated, I think what you're gonna find is just like there's hundreds of emerging issue and trends that are out there, and these are safety things that impact consumers as well as the fire service. It's forever a moving target, and the codes and the standards have a tendency to lag behind all these. So the technology always seems to come first, and then the safety standards are then employed. So we have this grace period where we're trying to do proactive fire prevention measures in the meantime until these standards can be met. And that's where we are right now. We're in this kind of a grace period. We ran through this with carbon monoxide technology as well years ago, where you couldn't connect it on the building fire alarm systems, the sensing technology. So we had to resort to residential type CO alarms in our nursing homes and all these different places to compensate for the lack of codes and standards on that. So
That's interesting. I heard a couple things that I didn't know. One was that maybe we heard this from UL, but that UL had seen bills moving or seen this technology moving and moved quickly to get 3700 into place. And one thing I actually hadn't thought about until this moment, but I want to make sure I'm thinking about it correctly. About what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So we've got the standards in place. The standards address these concerns. So without this bill, a Vermonter could go online and buy one of these things right now that's not certified and plug it in with nothing in state statute saying that there's anything to prevent them from doing it.
Right. Other than us piggybacking onto the NEC, that if we came across it, we could say this isn't permitted,
Right.
you know, so.
Because
you know,
one of the things we think about a lot sometimes is like, well, do we need to do anything? And
we went,
thinking this through right now, it's sort of like, well, I could go online and buy one tomorrow from Johnny's plug-in solar emporium and have it shipped to me and plug it in. And yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
So if I may,
Yeah.
Joe down the street has already done that as his woodworking shop in Essex, and melted a receptacle by backfeeding into it. So there's your case in point. I already have history of a plug-in solar device that has created a meltdown in an electrical circuit, or specifically the receptacle,
Right.
probably a loose connection. Yeah.
because we actually don't have
So
Any
yes, that's
place
already
around this right now.
out there, right? So the other thing that does regulate to some extent, but I don't know where the utilities stance finally landed on that, but to export, generate power and put it back on the utility um, has always been a concern.
Yeah, we've been talking to the utilities quite a bit. I'd have to look back through my notes. Rep. Torrey?
Well, it seems as more states approve this with the UL 3700, that will drive the market to produce them.
Right, the same
More states
compliant.
do it.
Yeah, and then we'll put Johnny out of business.
Well, we did, we had the same issue with, you know, EV bikes, scooters, hoverboards, the whole 9 yards. You know, it's been the same scenario. You know, you can go online and mix match all the charging units and stuff, and it comes down right to the consumer saving money. So
I'm just curious, like, where do consumers get their education on this? Like, whose website?
YouTube.
Okay.
That's where everybody gets their information. Google
that cheery-
AI. Google AI. There's a lot of do-it-yourselfers out there, and there's a lot of people that are willing to put everything that they know out there as well, good and bad.
But on the state front, do we have any best practices that we make available to the public?
The
I would
division
say-
releases information at times.
The division?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of training and outreach, especially to the fire service, on the response side and the hazard side and stuff like this. But we do have work to do on the public education side of this. So
I might offer, Mike, that we put something on our division page regarding the plug-in solar and it, being required, just to reiterate what the bill is stating.
Not a question for you, but I guess we should find out whether we can, well, it's a question for Mr. Dell, whether we can outlaw these things that don't, if they don't meet UL 3700, what happens if we try to do that?
Doesn't this effectively do that? I mean, by saying
Well,
they have to be compliant, we're sort of de facto saying that if it's not compliant, then you're not in compliance with state law.
right, well, I mean, I guess the question is, who is required to comply? Is it the consumer or whoever is selling these units into the state?
Well, That would be such a great question for the Attorney General. I wish they were,
I wish they were
wish they were here.
Go and come
Okay. All right.
I mean, nationally, there's been, not that I'm speaking on behalf of the National Association of State Fire Marshals, but I'm the president of that association. And we have written letters to Amazon and had unsafe devices and unsafe stuff removed from their online platform. Smoke alarms, CO alarms that were just terrible. So whether this is a item that reaches that that threshold, I can explore that at the national level as well. So they've been pretty reactive to us when we ask them to take stuff down.
Great. Good. All right.
That's probably where the cheapest units will be found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we can just roll on. Everybody okay with rolling forward?
Sure.
All right. Roll on.
Good morning. For the record, Todd Delos, Assistant Attorney General. Thanks for having me here to talk about, I think the agenda said,
I just noticed that and I
S213.
panicked. This is an S202 combo.
just
Right?
great. That's what
Okay.
I'm
Phew.
ready for.
All
I
right.
did not read S213.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Alex, can you fix that?
Yep.
Sorry about that.
I felt confident that this is what
Yeah.
it wants me. So I think just for framing, because we don't come into this committee very much, one of the main areas of work that the AGO is involved in is consumer protection. I think the last time I was here, we were talking about regulating the broadband market and sort of where we fit in that space. I would say in the kind of product contemplated under S202, this is much more within our lane of a consumer product. There may be representations made about the product. And the real question is, are they unfair and deceptive acts or practices in the marketplace? That's really the core of our consumer work. That's what Title IX, Chapter 63 really covers. There are a lot of nuances around that. The legislature has done a lot of work providing additional clarifications around unfair and deceptive practices and acts in specific areas of commerce. And so I would say for the purpose of this bill, insofar as there are concerns around what the representations are being made to consumers and how confirmable they are, we would certainly be able to act on those that were deemed unfair or deceptive. I will say in the solar marketplace, and this is going back maybe more than 10 years now, there were concerns around when there was a lot of money in rooftop solar and in fixed solar arrays, I guess we would call them. And a lot of the marketing was, hey, listen, the payback cost on this is 10 years. You'll be paying the same amount for the installation as you were paying for your electrical bill. And then you'll just be saving tons of money thereafter. We got a lot of complaints when people weren't seeing those savings even out. And they're very, very challenging consumer cases to manage, or I don't mean manage, but really prove, because there are a lot of variables. And I think this committee's heard a lot about those variables, right? What's the usage rate from day 1 to day 15? What are the appliance changes that may occur which impact the usage rate? What's the cost of energy over time, and how does that square up? And then there's how effective is this input, whether it's fixed solar or in this case portable solar, in kind of bringing down those costs in comparison. So I share that because I just want to be clear. Somebody's selling one of these portable devices and saying, hey, listen, it's going to pay for itself in 5 years given your usage rate. And then the person 5 years later, 6 years later says it's really not. That's not necessarily a slam dunk case for us. So I think what I see here is also a good opportunity for a lot of consumer education. And I think that can be done in partnership with utilities. I think it can be done in partnership with other stakeholders in this space. But I mostly wanted to frame it in that way because I think that was sort of the main thrust of what you're interested from us on a consumer angle. I think there are a couple legal questions that I'll juggle if you've got them. Recognizing I think Ledge Council is also capable of giving you some answers there, but was there more you want on the consumer front? And then I'm happy to kind of talk about utility liability, I think there was a question there.
Yeah.
On landlord tenant liability, there was a question there.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I heard what you said correctly. Because one larger question we had is, or one larger question I had was, if somebody has a complaint about one of these devices, do you guys have the tools you need? Is there anything we need to do in state statute? And it sounds like we don't need to start adding little nibbits to the title that covers basic consumer. I don't know. I'm not sure why we would call out one particular kind of device.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I would say there are other places where the legislature has determined that it's important to make clear a violation of this piece of the statute or piece of the title is an unfair and deceptive act or practice in commerce. As I read this is straightforward consumer protection, right? It's if you're, take it out of the solar context. I tell you, this car only has, and to be clear, our car dealers are actually great partners in all of this. So my example is purely facetious, but I'm going to sell you a car and I tell you it's got, 25,000 miles on it and it's a 2022. And then you buy it and turns out I've messed with the odometer. I don't think you can do that anymore. And it's clearly a 2015, right? I've been unfair. I've deceived you in the marketplace. You bought the car from me, assuming I'm a plug dealer. That's easy. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right? We're worried about these devices being marketed in a way that is deceptive to the consumer, such that the consumer, based on that deception, is making a decision to purchase or otherwise engage in commerce with this product. I don't think this is a bill as it's drafted that requires any special additional language there. I think we are comfortable with, if somebody's selling these, because there's nothing here that prescribes how it's marketed, right? It's really, the prescriptions are really around safety, and you just heard fire safety on that. I think there is an open question about sort of what's lawful under this in terms of purchasing a product that's not underwriter limited, otherwise approved by on technical standards, and then a maximum number that people plug in. Those are all sort of outside the consumer space, I would say. I'm happy to talk a little bit about the underwriter, the UL side of it.
Yeah. And then we had the utilities had a question about liability. I don't know if that's your.
I can opine on that.
We love opining.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sometimes,
Right.
yeah.
So I saw the language that I think was it Vermont Electric?
Yes.
Submitted it. And I also had a chance, as was flagged for me, to look at Utah and Virginia, which I have somewhere here. And I would say, my read on it, and I would defer to Ledge Counsel. As I understand how these work, I don't see a path for a lot of liability for utilities. I think, their counsel is going to have an opinion on where their liability lies. I don't defend them, and generally we don't sue them. So I don't represent them in any way, but just as another lawyer talking to you, I look at it and I say, it's hard for me to see the path to liability, but I certainly understand why they would want the protection. I just don't know is it's really necessary. And you could imagine a scenario, and again, this is just from the hip, not their lawyer, but you could imagine a scenario where there was actually a utility issue that wasn't necessarily related to the portable solar, and somehow this becomes protection that was unintended, or at least expands litigation around liability. I think also very rare.
And that suggested language came from one particular utility. And then we had testimony from Green Mountain Power, if I'm remembering correctly, basically said, we feel it's pretty clear that our liability stops at the meter. And I think they were more concerned that introducing new language would somehow muddy that very clear line that they feel exists.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And that strikes me as a very clear policy question for you all, but
Right.
I don't take issue with whichever utility it was who said that, because that would be
Okay.
so underwriter limited. I think from our lane, it's pretty clear in the statute as drafted. Now I've got to find out where it says, right. 9C on page 1, line 14, sort of requires what the compliance requirement is. I would say, there may be other avenues for if somebody were to purchase a product that didn't comply. We could certainly, depending on what the representations that the seller made were, right? Like, legal to sell in Vermont, or you can use it anywhere in Vermont, or anything like that, when it clearly doesn't meet the statute, that would be a deceptive practice in the marketplace. The use of a device, I move from Maine, I bring my portable device and plug it in. I don't know as there's necessarily, I would have to think about it a little bit more, an avenue for the Attorney General to act in that circumstance, right? Because the consumer has already made the purchase. The purchase was theoretically lawful at the time it was made. It wasn't unfair or deceptive. Then the consumer's using it in a manner that doesn't meet this definition. I do think that's a different scenario and not one where the AG acting on behalf of the state would come in. That could be a fire safety issue. That could be certainly maybe a utility issue. I don't actually know about that one, but there would be, I think the consumer would have liability there because they're using an unregulated and unlicensed product.
If we pass this.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, I think they're not lawful as it stands, though I haven't actually thought about that question. Right, in the absence of this, and this is where I'm out of my depth in utility law, I'm not sure what prohibits their use now.
So just, can you go back to the scenario where someone buys a device that does not meet the standards in the bill, plugs it in, something happens, where's the liability in that situation?
So from our lane, right, we're going to be, and at least as I'm thinking about it as the AG's office, and especially in the consumer space, if the purchase, so there's one scenario where I'm a Vermont consumer and this device is marketed to me in Vermont and it's made, gonna cut let's put the deception on the, like, how useful it is to one side and really just talk about, I can't use it here. If it doesn't meet these standards, doesn't match the definition of a portable solar generation device, energy generation device, I think that's a deceptive act. The different scenario, the one I posited, I purchase it in a different jurisdiction, move to Vermont, bring it with me, and plug it in, and it doesn't meet these standards. That's not a consumer, right? The consumer made a fair purchase in the marketplace. They were not deceived in that purchase. They're using it in a way that may not be lawful. There's no penalty in this bill for that, but it would not meet the standards. And that's where the question of sort of, is it prohibited otherwise? And I think I really did not read the bill with that in mind until we started talking about this. So I want to be a little thoughtful about how much, I don't think it would have, where section 248 comes in there would be a different, that might be a public service or PUC question. I don't want to drag them in unnecessarily, but I think it is a question that's open, and maybe I assume Ledge Council has thought about this, so I don't want to step on their toes. But in answer to your question, it wouldn't fall under the statute, and therefore, I think if there's a prohibition to using it, it would be prohibited. Now, where liability falls, the consumer would be unlawfully using this product. That's not really there's no criminal piece there, right?
And what we vote the section, what would you do? Somebody,
And
who would do it?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's us. And I think the question is sort of what happens with any unregulated energy generation device. That strikes me as a PUC issue. We don't generally go after like an individual doing an individual act unless it's a criminal matter. I say that broadly. I could come up with dozens of examples, but I don't think they'd be helpful. Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm also happy to think about it and share back if something comes to it.
Also, I don't, am I interrupting you? But in the middle, I have a question. Well, the other question is, can Vermont say that no manufacturer or distributor can sell devices in the state that are not UL 3700 listed. Can we say that, and does it have any effect if we do?
Broadly speaking, and this happens across the hall, right, in commerce, not infrequently. Broadly speaking, you can, with a reasonable basis, prohibit certain unsafe, that the argument would be, and as I understand it, right, UL is an independent body that we generally rely on for the safety of products. That's a reasonable basis to permit or prohibit the sale of a lot of different things. And there's no special protection that I'm aware of for these kind of generation devices. So yes, so we could see that broadly. And again, that's also a question for Ledge Council because they're your attorney clients and everything. But from where we sit, we defend the laws when they get passed. That's a defensible basis.
Do we have any? Yeah.
Just
Right,
the landlord.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So that was really interesting. I dug in a little bit. We had a side conversation last week about it. And, Representative Southworth's question, I think, as folks know, is like, where does liability fall? I'm a tenant. I plug this in. Generally speaking, and this is based on an aging attorney's recollection of landlord-tenant law from when I took the bar longer ago than I'm comfortable talking about on the record. Essentially, the very simple side of it, and again, Ledge Council could probably provide this more clearly, but the simple part of it is you rent an apartment. There are certain items that come with the apartment, depending on the lease, depending on what the landlord has provided, refrigerator, stove, maybe washer and dryer. Those are, if they come with the apartment, are generally considered fixtures and they're part of what you are renting. So in the scenario where this device is plugged in and you've rented the apartment with the device plugged in, arguably that's a fixture and the landlord is going to be responsible for liability arising out of it. The flip side scenario is, and I think this is part of how these devices are being marketed, and it's part of what I believe is the utility of this bill. A tenant comes and has the ability to bring their own portable device and cut back on their electricity costs, increase the number of the amount of sustainable energy being used or generated. That would be more akin to me bringing my own, maybe it's a space heater into my rental unit. Maybe it's a washing machine into my rental unit. Maybe it's any other device that I, the tenant, am bringing and plugging in. Then the liability would lie with me on that. Of course, there's a whole world, as lawyers love to do, of imagining, okay, but what if it's the wiring in the wall that wasn't sufficient to manage the plug-in device? I think you can have some language, and I think Virginia's got some language that makes, really draws it clearly that like you plug this thing in, tenant, it's on you. That's a policy question for you all to consider where the boundaries of that lie. As a former landlord with an old house, I would have wanted to have some pretty clear understanding of what was getting plugged in and what wasn't. We updated the wiring and have since sold the property. But I just say, like, thinking it through, having rented in Vermont and having also become a landlord in Vermont, I think the lease is the really clear piece there, right? Because then you're negotiating between the two of us where liability is going to fall on these things. Landlords could certainly permit it or not. And that would be something to consider. It's like, do you want that? But you can also make it clear in the statute if you really want to draw from it. Again, I think it could get thorny.
The Virginia law allows landlords to prohibit these if they have, I think, 4 or fewer units. It does not allow landlords to prohibit these if they own 5 or more units. That's another little bit of the picture here. But I'm wondering about this, and it's not specifically an AG question, but as we think about portable electric balcony, portable solar, balcony solar, like a lot of the uses for renters, and if these are to be, if the requirement is they be on a dedicated circuit and there be a unique receptacle and a unique plug, seems that a vanishingly small number of renters will pay to have that all done.
opining just as me, yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
And so I
And you'd
wonder,
be changing your landlords. Right, I
Property.
mean, you're investing essentially in your
Yeah.
landlords.
exactly. So, it feels like since the circuit and their septic will all stay with the property and possibly make it more attractive to tenants who want to do this. Whether that shouldn't be a landlord expense and, are there any similar analogies where landlords are obligated to meet a tenant request for something like that?
So let me start by saying, I think there are folks at Legal Aid who are excellent on this stuff.
Yes.
And I would defer to their expertise. Where we engage in landlord tenant tends to be around rental fees and things like that, where we've been brought in on, again, a kind of consumer protection side. Our consumer assistance program, which would take complaints around devices like this, is also a great avenue. And that's where we've gotten a lot of our solar complaints. So going again back to, it's a bad time of year to be on thin ice. But I'm gonna do. I would just say, so there's a warranty of habitability, which is sort of like the basic standard, right, for what a rental property has to be, and any landlord is required to meet this warranty of habitability. So again, that tends to be like, is there hot water, heat, functional utilities, and functional appliances? I think you get into a different realm where, and again, policy question for you all, but it's a different world when you're sort of saying, and I think it could potentially be challenging in a tight market to put requirements on landlords to meet tenant requirements. Can I just let it drift at that point, or finish that sentence? I mean, I hear you completely, Rep. Kleppinger, and I just would say, like, there's a world, Kleppner, excuse me, and I would say it becomes a challenging, if I bring my own BYO device and can then rent the property and tell you, hey, you need to put in $2,000 worth of wiring, timelines hard to get electricians, like, where do you get that?
And it strikes me the closest analogy to this would be an EV charger.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think we have a requirement now. Although it's going to be probably more of an issue.
Yeah, and I wonder too, again, question for legal aid, but what about dryer, right? I need a 220 volt plug-in or dryer. I don't know, is that something that I even require of a tenancy?
Thank you.
Not sure I'd stay.
Cold plunges are good for your health.
Totally. It's the biggest nerve. Anything else, Chair?
Very good.
I think we're
Good,
good.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. We can go off live. We have, let's just look ahead. Let's see here. We have caucus of the whole at 10, joint assembly lunch, or committee we're done. Committee is back at 3:00 tomorrow, Thursday, to talk more about this, but we're going to talk about the Utah and Virginia legislation with Ledge Council. It should be interesting. All right. Thanks, everybody.
I have a question for you.